Hey everyone, and welcome to Developer Tea. My name is Jonathan Cottrell, and in today's episode, I speak with Christopher Schmitt. I met Chris as a part of CSS DevConf. Chris is one half of Environments for Humans. They put on conferences for developers. You may also know Chris from some of his publications, CSS Cookbook, Adapting to Web Standards, or Professional CSS. Chris is such a inviting person. He's such an important part of especially the CSS community, but also the web development community in general. So I was excited to sit down and talk with Chris, and we'll get into that interview in just a minute. I want to thank today's sponsor, DigitalOcean. If you are looking for a cloud hosting solution that you can get up and running with in under a minute, and that costs you $5 a month, then DigitalOcean is a perfect opportunity for you. We'll talk more about what DigitalOcean has to offer you later on in the episode, but first I want to jump straight into the interview with Christopher Schmitt. Thanks so much for being on the show today, Chris.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you. You have a lot of interesting things on your resume, but most people know you because they've seen you, they've met you at conferences around the United States. I suppose you've been around the world to conferences. Is that true?
Yeah. I go to conferences. I speak at conferences, and with my partner, Ari Stiles, I produce a lot of conferences too.
And we will talk about Environments for Humans in just a little bit for sure. Some people may also know you from the CSS Cookbook, and some people may know you from Non-Breaking Space. There are a ton of things, actually, that you may know Chris from. Chris, I'd like to go kind of back to the beginning and ask you, how did you get into web development from the start?
Well, it goes back in time a little bit, or a lot. It was the early 90s. It was Achtung Baby, Pearl Jam, if you will. And I was in college in design school, learning graphic design, print design, and learning everything you need to know, and that goes through graphic design school. And I was really, I love design. I love being able to formulate and bring content, imagery, editing, all the design techniques that you need to put together a presentation in a fixed medium. But I was really interested, and I think one way I describe it is getting the most bang for your buck in terms of if you give a print designer like X amount of money, how many people will be able to see a pamphlet or a business annual or a commercial on TV or what have you, if they do video, whatever. So well, then I found this web, and actually before that, I was finding what's called the Microsoft Help files, which I don't think they use them anymore, but and it was like this, you could write your own help files, and that was kind of like ubiquitous. It doesn't matter, and Windows kind of ruled the world by that time. It was like, wow, this is a great way to disseminate information. And, it was kind of limited in terms of design, of typography and all that stuff. So it was really terrible. And then almost on the same weekend or month, I discovered the web. I was like, oh, wow, this is great. And, the web back then was, just really cheesy bullets with links to the few hundred websites that were on the web that were popular, like the Netscape Aquarium Cam, Fish Cam.
That was back when AOL had the keywords that would take you directly to a website.
Yeah, exactly. And then it would send you CD-ROMs in the mail.
Oh yeah, you could get the internet as a program, install the internet, really.
Yeah,
pay by the hour kind of stuff.
Oh man, that was terrible. Oh geez, but and the modem noise when you logged in. Yeah. So, but I was at the university, so I didn't have to worry about dial-up that much, so it was pretty good. So, I made a couple custom web pages, and I showed my design mentor at the time what the web was, because we have always had discussions about stuff that I was looking into, and what she was bringing into class and all that stuff. And so, one of these moments, I was just like, "Hey, this is the web. This is what it does." And she saw the pages, saw what's out there, and saw what I was doing, and she looked at me and said, "Like, Chris." Like, what? You should be doing web design. And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, what is web design?" And then shortly after that, I looked more into it because I love the idea of being able to design on the web, with the same amount of money that you would get for a project for a brochure, like I was talking about before, but the potential to reach more people over vast distances really appealed to me. So I went to the bookstore, which is crazy for web. Got David Siegel's Creating Killer Websites and Linda Wyman's Creating Web Graphics, Designing Web Graphics. I forget which one it's called.
we'll include it in the show notes either way.
But it was like Linda's book was the first web book that was in color, and then that told you kind of the basics of how to build web pages. And then David Siegel's book just taught you like design techniques, designing for the web in terms of a more traditional designer's approach. And of course, they were all a bunch of hacks. It was like HTML table layouts, single pixel GIFs, and what have you. But they made kind of visual sense of the web back then. That's those tools that we had. Either that, or everything was going to be aligned center. Which is somewhat what we have now with responsive design. A little bit everything's like design. But yeah, so that was that's pretty much. And I got rolling on that. And David Siegel had his studio in San Francisco called Studio Verso, and he ran a little what we call blog, I guess now, called High Five. And every week he would write about this great looking website and talk to designers and talk to how they made it. And it grew into this kind of like almost daily publication, but not really. They had new stuff every day, but not really. Probably like every other day. And I got hired right out of college to help produce it, and so I thrust myself into San Francisco and during the .com rush and started producing sites and just talking to all these cool people, building cool sites, and just and everyone at Studio Verso I worked at Studio Verso's office, and everyone there was just so amazingly talented and smarter than I was. So it was a very humbling but really cool experience.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that's sort of how I got started, I guess.
Yeah. So there's some. I was reminiscing back to my early days as you were talking. I was remembering back when we had web safe colors. Like there was a limited set of colors we could use, and not even that long ago, when there was a limited number of fonts really that we could use reliably. And that was it. You had your basic font stack, and everybody used those fonts. And using something beyond that, typically we used like Flash replacement. Do you remember what was the name of the tool?
Well, was it something called Swiffer or something like that, or
yeah, there was the Swiffer which replaced like you could embed a Swift thing, but then there was this other tool, Kufon. It was. If I remember correctly, it was actually a canvas that it would replace the font with, rather than Flash.
Yeah, and that was supposed to help solve the problem because we would always make our headings out of GIFs.
Yeah.
Adobe came out with a server-side tool that would take your HTML headings.
Oh yeah, I remember this.
And replace them automatically. And I remember like Jeff Veen video promotion, like talking about how awesome it is and everything like that. It's just like, yeah, that's pretty cool, but I just don't know if I'm going to install a server just so I can have a cool
header. Yeah.
But the funny thing is that I actually made and designed a mouse pad that had the web safe colors in a color wheel arrangement. So it was a circular mouse pad because the safety palette for the web safe color palette was it's based off a cube, so it's a mathematical cube, and so it's programmed or engineered very well. But as a designer, it doesn't really talk about palettes of color, how to complementary colors, whatever. So I actually took the web safe colors in the web safe palette and put them into a color wheel, and then I put that onto a really I think a really nice mouse pad. And that was like my first thing I sold. Actually, I made and sold was I think we sold like over 25,000.
Oh, that's great.
mouse pads about that. So I still use it. It's on my desk. So it's nice just to have like, I need a color for this. Oh, okay.
Perfect color. That's great. Really, really fun time in the early days of the internet. That was also back when I was doing interactive Flash ads, like banner ads.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
the good guy kind, not the pop-up kind, but for bands and things like that.
Not the click which state you're on, so you get refi your house.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah. So then you practiced web development presumably for a few years, and what ultimately inspired you to write the CSS Cookbook?
Well, I love CSS. It's a mixture of design skills, the artistic side, and then also mathematical side, and just to produce something of visual, aesthetic, which is which as a designer, which I totally love. So, and I think that's still true for print design as it is for web design. And so I love CSS. I love what it could do. But at the time when the CSS Cookbook first edition came out, there was, like browsers today have, robust CSS support. It's almost like a given that browser comes out and it has like robust CSS support. But there was a time when that wasn't the case. We were all just doing font tags inline. We were like spacer diffs, like we were talking about. Like there's like center tags that we had to deal with, multiple nested tables. And so CSS came out mostly from IE. Someone's going to probably tell you this didn't want to happen, whatever. But Netscape came out with their version of CSS, but it was kind of JavaScript powered CSS. Mm-hmm. And then IE realized that, snap, we really need a browser because everyone's going to love this internet thing. And Netscape is owning the market. So they came out with a browser. And so version 2 to 3, they started like bringing in kind of native CSS support without. So if you turn off JavaScript in Netscape, you wouldn't get any CSS support in your web pages. Mm-hmm. So IE came out with a browser that had native CSS support. It was still very limited in IE3, but that was kind of like the turning point of CSS. And so I'm not sure really where it happened, but there was certain kind of hacks or techniques that we're looking at that were kind of coming commonplace and practical, and maybe a little too much for our bookmarks, to me, unwieldy. So I was like, we should really, someone should write a book that says kind of like catalogs, not everything that you could do with CSS, because that's, because that's kind of what the spec is about, but kind of like just focus on what's practical in the browsers today. So the first version of the book was like about close to 100 recipes of CSS tricks, and they were very practical. So you could do some things, but if I couldn't do it cross browser at the time, I didn't put it in the book because it just, I was like, I really wanted to be a practical book and not talk about like things that might happen. So that's kind of how that book got started.
It is at the third edition. Is it locked at that, do you think? Or
no, so the third edition is kind of old. It was like I actually will be probably writing that next year, fourth edition, and that will it's been a while, but it came out right before CSS3 became white hot. So I sort of missed the whole like web font, blow up with Typekit and how easy it is to embed fonts now. So and there's a lot more to put into it. So the first edition was like 100 pages. The second edition was 250. The third edition was 800 pages if you got the ebook version. Mm-hmm. So the fourth edition is actually talking to my editor that we're probably going to just do it in like mini books, if you will. But so we'll be focusing on, and I don't know if anyone knows what a cookbook is, but a cookbook is, a set of recipes, or like, and we'll call recipes, like you have a problem statement, and then you write a solution, and then you kind of have a discussion as why the solution is better, or there's other ways you can go about solving a problem. And each chapter deals with a separate issue. So you may have a chapter that deals with images for the web topography, tabular data representation, we know the chapter, and so on. And so we're probably there's so much stuff I think that's going to go in there, like the animations chapter alone would probably be astounding.
Yeah.
So we're probably just going to tackle it as a mini book, and then when it gets down to the road, to end the road, we'll probably just make this Uber book that you can buy as an ebook.
Super book. There's going to be an entire chapter on centering things, hopefully.
Yeah, there's so many ways to center things now, but I was doing actually like learning more about Flexbox last week, and so I'm like really ecstatic about Flexbox and really happy with the support it has in modern browsers.
Well, I think you picked a good year to update it, because I believe IE support for IE 9 and, well, I know IE 8 for sure, and I think it's IE 8 and 9. Microsoft is dropping support for those browsers, and presumably, I would assume that a lot of the content that you're going to write about in these upcoming individual chapter books will end up ignoring a lot of that older tech that was, those hacks and those things that otherwise are no longer really useful.
Well, back in the day, right, like a browser would take a year to release a new update.
Mm-hmm.
And then Chrome just kind of just like said, like, let's just, we're not going to play with those rules anymore. And so they just update like every 2 weeks. I don't know how often they update, but they release the Canary update, every so often. And so, so we used to say like Netscape 4.5, or like, IE3, this works in IE3. And so now it's just totally like, just as a book author, now it's just like, just wash your hands of it and just say it's supported, yes or no type of thing. So it's pretty nice. But I am happy by like that we don't have to deal with IE 8 or 9 anymore in the near future. So that's pretty good. I mean, it's, I remember like going around to speaking at places and seeing people still have to support IE 6 and 7. And, it's just like, oh man, sorry.
That's rough.
Sorry.
That's rough.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is, we have level 4 selectors. I talked about this on your show, and I talked about it at one of the conferences that Environments for Humans put on, actually. But level 4 selectors are coming out, and some of them are already available on Safari. And that's going to change the landscape of CSS again. And it's all moving so quickly. If you are using or if you are creating a browser that doesn't automatically update, the spec is going to start moving faster than your browser does. And in fact, I would say it already does move faster than the browsers typically do.
Well, yeah, we run into the issue of like the spec falling behind a little bit, but it's okay with that. I think the more I'm concerned about is this: if the browsers start dictating what the spec should be. But it's always been like a give and take. It's been like a big tug of war, if you will. Like, you need to have browsers to innovate and find new things and try things out. And then you always have the spec writers saying like, well, we need, these certain features into a browser. But at the end of the day, it's the browser that implements, the spec. So
yeah, they kind of hold the keys there.
Yeah. So that's, as they say, the rubber hits the road with the browser. So we just, whatever, we're at their mercy a little bit, but at the same time, it I think it's been a great renaissance, I think, with just having the spec writers and the browser vendors working together. And also, I feel like you can look at that with the responsive images community group, which is, this kind of like thing. I felt like it was kind of like this W3C had like, oh, community group, if you really, really want to talk to us, that's a very good former community group. And then I don't think they were expecting this big group come together over responsive images and trying to solve this problem. And it was like, multi-year, it took a while, don't get me wrong. And a lot of solutions came up there, but it's nice to be able to come to the browser and to the spec writers and say like, hey, here are some solutions, here's test cases. We actually need this. And at first the spec writers were like, no, you don't need this. And then it's like, oh, then they kind of like relented and said like, looked at it some more. And then, then we talked to the browser vendors and, the engineers and told them what could and can happen. And so it was like, so the solution that we have now is not the one that we would have, I think, everyone in the group, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I just feel like it's definitely not the solution that we would have started out with, but it's a solution that, works and it's great. And that's only because of people coming together and talking about it and talking what they need to actually, build great web pages on multiple devices and stuff like that. So it's really just an interesting dynamic of specs versus browsers.
Yeah, it's like practical versus ideal, right? Like you have the actual practicing developer, and then you have the person who's developing the spec that may or may not be, in an agency environment. And when they get in a room together, they may have competing opinions, but they come out on the other side, hopefully, and again, ideally, with something that is both, that works, that keeps in mind, for example, accessibility, but also is easy enough to use that it's easily adopted by people who are already using CSS in their everyday jobs. Well, great. I think we're going to take a quick sponsor break, and then I want to come back and talk with you specifically about conferences and talk about Environments for Humans, your experiences with Environments for Humans, and then we will end out this part of the interview. And then in the next episode of Developer Tea, if you're listening to this right now, You're listening to part one of a two-part interview with Chris. In the next part, we're going to talk about a bunch of other things that I'm not going to give them away. So come back and make sure you listen to that second episode, the second part of the interview. But first, let's talk about today's sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by one of my very favorite services on the planet. That's DigitalOcean. If you are looking for an SSD cloud hosting solution that's super fast and incredibly affordable and incredibly easy to use, DigitalOcean is a perfect opportunity for you. Go and check it out, DigitalOcean.com. The entry-level plan for DigitalOcean is only $5 a month. That gets you 20 gigabytes of SSD super fast space, a terabyte of bandwidth transfer, and 512 megabytes of RAM on that machine. And you can put anything you want to on this machine. You get root access, and you can get this thing set up in less than a minute. So if you are looking for a hosting provider, try out DigitalOcean. Now, if that wasn't already enough, DigitalOcean is providing a $10 credit if you use the code DeveloperT at checkout. So that's basically like 2 months completely for free on DigitalOcean.com on their entry-level droplet. So go and check it out, DigitalOcean.com. Make sure you do not forget that code DeveloperT at checkout to get the $10 credit just for being a listener of the show. And of course, that helps out DeveloperT as well. Thank you so much to DigitalOcean for being a longtime sponsor of DeveloperT in 2015. And of course, as always, those links will be in the show notes at spec.fm. So Chris, we've been talking about CSS primarily. You wrote the CSS Cookbook for O'Reilly, and that's going to be updated, you said, hopefully next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so right now I'm working on a book called Responsively Retrofitting.
Cool.
And it's responsive web design makeovers. And so I just did a Kickstarter for that. And so
very nice. Is that one through or for O'Reilly? Is it published?
Yeah, it's going to be through O'Reilly. And so Kickstarter to help me free up some of my time so I can actually focus on it.
Great.
And so that one's focused more on it's niche-y, but it's to help people who can't invest either time and or money to start from scratch to build a responsive website. Mm-hmm. And just to help them, their websites get more mobile friendly with to be as not as invasive as possible. Like, and maybe just put in one extra script tag or one extra style tag into their site and to make it work. Be more multi-device friendly.
Yeah,
do that. So this is we have a few demos in there, and it's going to be teaching responsive web design by way of this kind of like really niche thing. So I feel like there's a really big focus on that, especially when you have so many sites out there that are updated content wise, but their shell is still trapped in legacy websites that maybe table layouts or old fixed width layouts, and so you want to. And with Google kind of penalizing them for not being mobile friendly, I just want to. So there's I think there's a big cry out for that.
Yeah.
So
it makes the web better. It brings up kind of the bottom end of, or the floor, I guess, the minimum quality of a given website. Hopefully, this is one of those injections of quality into the atmosphere.
Right. Well, I hope so. Hope it's quality. So, but the CSS Cookbook, like you mentioned, is right after that one. I get to dive into working with CSS Cookbook.
Yeah. Well, other than writing, though, you run, at least you are part owner of Environments for Humans. For developers who are currently listening, what do they miss out on by not going to a conference?
I guess, when I first started out, I felt like there's the major ways of learning or, of course, like online. Because there's one thing I love about our community, I think, and I love about like this podcast is that we actually share what we learn very easily, unlike other industries. However, things just change really fast, right?
Yeah.
Things just, technologies change fast. What we're building up with today is different than it was yesterday. Like this past week or so, WordPress says that they're going to focus more on JavaScript. And not that they would shy away from PHP, that just kind of shows me that they're going to more of a JavaScript solution in the future. And so you wouldn't think about that like 1 year ago or 5 years ago. And since things change so fast, and we're so busy, with our jobs and our families or our lives, things that that other things that matter to us, it's kind of easy to fall out of rhythm of what's going on, what's the latest and greatest. And so I find conferences are a great way to either underscore or let you know that you are on the right path of what you're doing, or that you are doing the right thing, as well as learning and opening up your mind to new ideas and new approaches to new technologies, and seeing what's on the horizon. Like, we do the CSS DevConf conference, and one of the things that people always love is seeing the stuff that's like almost here, so they can prepare and learn more about it. So when it comes, they're not too surprised. Like last year we had CSS DevConf. The best presentation was Jen Simmons, and she did a great presentation about new layout technologies that are available through CSS that are coming, like CSS shades and grids and something like that.
So cool.
So really cool stuff, but it's not here, but it's almost here. So that's some stuff you can find out about it, but also meeting colleagues and having what we call like hallway discussions. And the first time I came associated, like I knew about them, was through South by Southwest, when it was more like web focused, if you will. And it was on this interactive. Southwest was like just probably about 10 rooms in the top floor of the Austin Convention Center. And the best things were meeting all these cool people who I knew via their websites, and just talking to them and getting to know what they're up to and what challenges they were having. Not just with the web, but with everything else that was going in, and get to know them as friends. That was probably the best part of South by Southwest. So it's just kind of miss those days, because South by is kind of a different beast, but so is our industry is kind of different than it was then. But there's other conferences out there where you can meet colleagues and find out what they're doing and what kind of solutions, what problems that they're tackling, and what solutions they're looking for too. So I found that that's probably the most interesting part of conferences, as well as learning new things. And like I said, like with CSS DevConf, which is our most famous, I guess, or our in-person conference that we do, we spent a lot of time trying to find ways, not just to make sure we have great speakers and all that stuff, but for the entertainment, and trying to find ways for people to talk and get to know each other. Because we find that there's lots of introverts in there.
Yeah,
which is
sure.
I'm totally an introvert. So, but it's you just and to get people to talk to each other and find them, kind of find those icebreakers and do new cool things. And so, like, one of the things that we've done the last couple of years is be able to do tours, with whichever locale. So, like, one of the things we see as a DevConf is that we actually try to find and inject some of the flavor of where we are. So we were able to do like ghost tours at the Stanley Hotel, because that's where we had the DevConf a couple years ago. And then we did like you can do a history, or a voodoo tour in New Orleans, where we were last year, and you do a tour of the Queen Mary this past year. And that was great. And so you go tours on groups and get to know each other on that way, as well as other activities and something like that too. So.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people kind of take for granted in the web development community, and that is, the importance of actually talking to people. And I do want to talk about your remote conferences, but these on location conferences, I actually did an episode it was last week, I believe, about taking advantage of conferences, and or it may have been a few weeks ago, but in any case, it was talking about taking advantage of conferences and being certain that you're intentional about the people that are there. Because if you're just there for the content, if you're just there for the sessions, quite honestly, you could probably get a good amount of that content online already, right? Like, and that's not to say that there's no value if you're just there for the sessions. You can definitely get extra value by being there, because you can walk up and talk to the person about that session, or you can raise your hand and ask a question, which you can't really do effectively if you're, watching this on YouTube after the fact, right? There's two totally different situations. But actually sitting at lunch with another developer who lives on the other side of the country from you and faces similar problems to what you face, that's actually really valuable. And ask yourself, how often do you get to talk to other developers face to face who are in similar situations to you, particularly other developers who are not on your team? That's a really important thing, in my opinion, at least. That's a really important piece of the conference puzzle.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's just, just to find people who have common problems, and might have a solution that you would never thought of,
Mm-hmm.
or expound on some, technique or whatnot, is that a speaker was talking about, is just pretty awesome. It's, there's learning by like looking on the web or a book, but then like when you're actually there and you actually like, a really great presentation is something that is someone who tells a story, and even, tells a technology problem, tells a really great way of solving the problem, and then also, talks about different ways they can solve it, just
Mm-hmm.
Is a way better and almost priceless in comparison to a blog post.
Yeah.
About it, because you're able to remember the presentation so much more vividly than you would like a blog post. So not to say a blog post can't be great and well designed, but
Well, it's just a different medium with different values. It's like saying you can't equalize a tweet and a blog post either, right? They both have certain amount of value, but honestly, it's much more likely that you're going to get more value out of a blog post than you do out of a tweet, because they're different formats, right? So one thing I remember from CSS DevConf this year, somebody asked about, they were asking about the people on the stage, and they said, you all have, you found a way basically to make it on the stage. And how do we, as the people who are not on the stage, get to the place where we are, building content like you are? And they were asking specifically, they said, I go to write something, and then either somebody else has already written it, or it's just not interesting enough for me to write. And I think the element that you just pointed out, Chris, is kind of the magic element, and that is story and the individual's experience. There's so many different ways of doing certain things, but eventually you kind of hit a threshold. There's only so many ways that you can change a font on a page, right? However, there are nearly infinite, I won't say infinite because that's probably not true, but there are a lot of situations where typography is really particular to that story, to that use case, to that particular project. And if you tell your story and you do it in a entertaining or compelling way, people can learn from you, even if it's something they already technically know.
Right.
That is probably the most insightful thing. That's actually the reason this podcast exists. I'm not saying anything that nobody else has, uncovered in some way or another. I learned it from other people. I'm not, unearthing some hidden secrets deep in a cave or something like that. I'm talking with you, Chris, and we're talking about our experiences.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like, one of my heroes is like, Chris Coyer, and I think everyone knows about CSS Tricks, right? And the way he blogs is who he is,
mm-hmm.
right? And so, like, I met Chris. He's speaking on spoken art stuff. He's just a great guy, down to earth guy. But I because I've gone to conferences and I've met him, I hear him when I read his blog posts,
mm-hmm.
and I know his. And that was before I met him. I could spot a Chris Coyer blog post just because the way he writes it, right? And so it's very authentic to who he is and how he writes,
mm-hmm.
and so I could go to him because I know what I'm reading is his point of view and how he approaches the problem, and he also like finds. He almost writes the CSS Cookbook because like he always has other alternative ways to solve a problem, but that doesn't mean that just because someone else has already solved the problem or has an issue with the web or whatnot and has already posted it on a blog doesn't mean that you don't need to push it up there as well. It's sort of like saying like
mm-hmm.
Chevrolet already made a car. Why do I need to why does Honda need to make a car? As long as it's authentic and you're publishing something from a true source or true point of view, I think people will resonate with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So in that spirit of telling stories, I want to round out this part of the interview by asking you, if you have any, to share some stories from this year's conference or conferences rather, that stuck out to you. Maybe it was just a presentation, or maybe it was somebody who came up and talked to you specifically. Can you share a story about this year's conferences that kind of sticks out to you and is a good memory maybe?
Well, I think as a conference organizer, One thing that we do differently, and it was from kind of like day one of CSS DevConf, is that we do a double blind voting.
Yeah, yeah.
For our people who submit a conference and to submit a talk to the conference. And so one of the reasons why we do that is that we want to make it don't give any bias. So and by double blind, if no one is listening doesn't know that, is that we strip out a person's name and their kind of bio from their submission, and then have the community at large vote on it. And so that way we can figure out what content people really want to see versus people they want to see. You referenced the wrap-up panel earlier, and so in the wrap-up panel is kind of a tradition at DevConf, is that every available speaker, some people have to catch flights or whatnot, but so they all can't be there. But everyone who can be there, we invite them onto the stage, and the idea is sort of just see if there's any questions you wanted to ask about any topic that was presented before the end of the conference, pretty much. This is your time. This is your chance. And the idea is not to put your speakers on a pedestal, but mostly to say we're all colleagues and we're all the same. There's one thing that I think Molly Hochschlag she told me is that I think his old saying is that there's more knowledge in the audience than on the speaker on the stage.
Yeah,
we really want to get a dialogue going between the speakers and the attendees. And and one of the things that you mentioned, the question is how can I be a speaker at the event? One of the questions asked was, I think this is what it was. I think the question was asked from the audience was when you submitted your talk to the DevConf, did you already have it written out, or did you already know what the topic was? Mm-hmm. And just raise your hand if you did not. And I think most people on the stage raised their hand. They didn't have it. So it was just so between the time they said that they were going to, they want to talk about this, and the time they actually showed up, they actually worked hard on producing a new presentation. And so I think that kind of that shocked me as a conference organizer. Oh my gosh, these people just signed up and they were ready. Oh my God. But at the same time, we're really professional. We really trust everyone to show up and do a great job. But I hope that inspired people to when it comes time when someone does a call for speakers for a conference, just to think about what they would want to see. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that you've done a talk before, but think about what you really want to see on stage and have that authentic voice in there. It's what would be really cool if we had to talk about this, and then flesh that idea a little bit and then submit that and see how that goes. Because I feel this, the industry needs new voices all the time, and it needs your voice. Whoever I'm talking to you right now, we need your voice, and just don't keep it quiet.
Yeah, I would say that more than any other industry, more voices doesn't necessarily mean competition. We're fighting, right? That's the one of the most amazing things about this industry to me. I could talk about this all the time, but it's that uniquely from most other industries, we are mostly non-cannibalistic. In other words, my business getting better typically doesn't hurt your business because everybody needs there is a massive hole, I guess you could say, a massive need that the demand is much larger than the supply right now. And presumably will be for the foreseeable future for development of some sort, right? Whether it's web development or other types of software development, demand for this is not going anywhere except up. And so because of that, when we have more people taking leadership, stepping up and inserting their voice into this discussion, well, it just makes the industry better. More knowledgeable people step into the gaps, and the new technologies are unearthed. New ways of using old technologies are unearthed, and new stories, ultimately, they inform us and they teach us new things that we otherwise never would have known. So if you feel like there's a gap if you're listening to this episode now and you feel like there's a gap between you and publishing and becoming, I don't know, the next Chris Coyier or whatever, there's not. There's not a gap there. It is just about taking those steps. Now, am I saying it's easy? Absolutely not. Nothing worth doing, and to quote whoever it was that said this, I couldn't tell you, but nothing really worth doing is all that easy, right? But is it worth it? I would say yes. I totally think that getting involved in these kinds of things, publishing your opinions, publishing your stories, and stepping up and taking leadership in the industry, there's space for you.
Totally agree.
Well, that wraps up the first part of the interview. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today, and we will continue this interview in the next episode of Developer Tea.
Well, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
And thank you for listening to Developer Tea today. Thank you so much to Christopher for joining me on this episode and the next episode of Developer Tea. If you don't want to miss out on that episode, make sure you subscribe to the show in whatever podcasting app you use. You can always find the show notes for this episode and every other episode at spec.fm. Thank you again to today's sponsor, DigitalOcean.com. If you are looking for a SSD cloud hosting solution, DigitalOcean.com is a fantastic solution for you. Remember the code DeveloperT, which you can find in the show notes. And of course, until next time, enjoy your tea.